The wind howled like 1,000 tortured souls, drowning Lyra's desperate cries for help. Death was tracking her through the blizzard, patient and inevitable. Snow fell in merciless sheets across the Estonian wilderness, burying Talon's distant walls behind an impenetrable white veil. Lyra Rose clutched her torn woolen cloak tighter around her trembling frame, each labored breath forming ghostly clouds that the storm immediately devoured. The merchant caravan she had joined for safe passage to the city had been ambushed just hours ago. Bandits had slaughtered the guards and merchants alike, taking everything of value. In the chaos, Lyra had fled into the forest, a decision that now seemed merely to have exchanged a quick death for a slow one. The temperature was plummeting as night approached, and her sodden boots crunched through snow that reached mid-calf. Each step became more arduous than the last as numbness crept up from her toes. The medieval clothes that had seemed adequate in the morning now felt as substantial as gossamer against winter's fury. She had escaped with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small flint in her pocket, insufficient weapons against nature's onslaught. The distant howl of wolves pierced through the wind's wail, sending icy terror through Lyra's veins that had nothing to do with the cold. Survivors of harsh Estonian winters told tales of wolf packs growing bold and desperate during blizzards, tracking the scent of vulnerability for miles. Her fingers, red and swollen, fumbled with branches as she attempted to gather wood. Each piece collected was a small victory against the elements, but she knew fire-making would be nearly impossible in this wind. Still, surrender meant death. And despite the growing temptation to simply lie down in the snow's deceptive embrace, something fierce within Lyra refused to yield. Her family had not raised her to die without a fight. The daughter of a healer, she knew enough about survival to seek shelter first. The howls grew closer as darkness thickened around her. Through the curtain of white, Lyra spotted a dark recess in the landscape, perhaps a rock formation or a small cave. Hope fluttered weakly in her chest as she forced her freezing limbs to move faster toward it. The shelter turned out to be an ancient, massive spruce, its lower branches creating a natural hollow beneath, sheltered from direct wind and accumulating snow. Crawling beneath it, Lyra cleared the ground with numb hands. The air was slightly warmer here, protected from the wind's bite. With trembling fingers, she arranged the collected branches into a small pyramid, just as her father had taught her. The wolves howled again, closer now. Lyra fumbled with her flint, striking it against a stone, watching desperately as sparks flew but died before catching. Tears froze on her cheeks as she tried again and again, her movements growing clumsier as hypothermia tightened its grip. On the 7th attempt, a tiny ember caught on a piece of bark. Lyra lowered her face to it, blowing with aching lungs, nurturing the spark as if it contained her very soul. A small flame finally licked upward, its warmth infinitesimal, but its psychological impact immense. Feeding the fire carefully with the driest twigs she could find, Lyra huddled close, extending her hands toward the growing flames. The wolves' calls seemed to hesitate, respectful of mankind's ancient alliance with fire. In the dancing light, Lyra assessed her situation with brutal clarity. The blizzard showed no signs of abating. Her shelter was temporary at best. She had no food, and the fire would need constant feeding. Without help, her chances of surviving until dawn were slim. The young woman pulled her knees to her chest, conserving what little warmth remained in her core. As shadows danced across her face, Lyra closed her eyes briefly and sent a prayer into the storm, not for miraculous salvation, but for the strength to face whatever came next with dignity. Across the frozen landscape, cutting through the blinding storm with grim determination, a lone figure on horseback followed a path known only to him. King Magnus Windsor, ruler of the Northern Territories, was not a man who surrendered to winter's challenges. The wolf's distant howling reached his ears, and his eyes narrowed beneath the fur of his hood. Something other than hunger drove the pack tonight. The scent of vulnerability of human prey was carried on the wind, and where there was prey in his domain, Magnus would find it first. His massive black destrier pushed forward through snowdrifts that would have stopped lesser mounts, guided by the instincts of a rider who had conquered these forests since boyhood. The king's breath fogged in the air as he adjusted course, following not just the wolves' calls, but the almost imperceptible glow of what could only be firelight through the trees ahead. Someone fought for life in his forest tonight. Whether friend or foe, they would soon know the presence of the Alpha King. The fire sputtered weakly as Lyra fought against exhaustion, each blink becoming dangerously longer. The sound of snapping twigs beyond her small circle of light jolted her fully awake. Yellow eyes reflected the firelight from between the trees. Not one pair, but 3, 4, 5. The wolf pack had found her. Lyra grabbed the longest branch from her fire, holding it outward like a torch as she backed against the trunk of the ancient spruce. A large gray wolf stepped forward, snow clinging to its thick fur, hunger evident in the prominence of its ribs. It bared yellowed teeth, unimpressed by her meager defense. The pack began to circle, cutting off any possibility of escape. Lyra's arm trembled with the effort of holding the flaming branch steady. The lead wolf crouched, muscles tensing in preparation to lunge. A scream built in her throat as the beast launched itself toward her, only to be interrupted by the thunderous sound of hoofbeats and a roaring battle cry that seemed to shake snow from the branches above. Like an apparition materializing from the storm itself, a massive black horse burst through the tree line, its rider a mountain of fur and leather. The wolves scattered at the sudden intrusion, all except the alpha that had committed to its attack. In one fluid motion, the horseman drew a gleaming sword and swung it in a deadly arc. The blade connected with the leaping wolf mid-air, its momentum carrying the mortally wounded animal past Lyra. Blood steamed in the snow as the rider wheeled his mount around, positioning himself between Lyra and the retreating pack. For several heartbeats, Lyra could only stare at her savior in shock. He was enormous, his shoulders broad enough to block out the storm behind him. A beard dusted with ice framed a face that seemed carved from the same unforgiving stone as the northern mountains. But it was his eyes that captured her. Piercing blue, calculating, assessing her with an intensity that made her forget the cold momentarily. The remaining wolves melted into the darkness, unwilling to challenge this new predator who had so easily dispatched their leader. "You're far from safety, girl, will be," the man said, his deep voice cutting through the wind's howl. He dismounted in a single smooth movement despite his size, keeping his sword drawn as he approached. Lyra clutched her burning branch tighter, unsure if she'd exchanged one danger for another. The man noticed her apprehension and sheathed his weapon with a hint of amusement in his otherwise stern expression. "I am Magnus Windsor. These forests and all within them are under my protection." The name struck Lyra like physical force. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories stood before her, a ruler known as much for his merciless justice as for his protection of his people. Tales of his exploits were told throughout the land, some painting him as hero, others as tyrant. Up close, she could see the truth was likely somewhere between. His face bore scars that spoke of battles survived, but his eyes held a sharp intelligence that belied the simple, barbarian king of tavern stories. Lyra rose. She managed to reply, her voice cracking from cold and fear. "My caravan was attacked. I ran." Magnus nodded once, seeming to absorb her entire situation in a glance. Without another word, he removed his heavy fur cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth and weight of it nearly brought Lyra to her knees. "The storm worsens. We must move quickly if you wish to live through the night," he stated, already turning to his horse. Behind his matter-of-fact tone, Lyra sensed something unexpected. Not just duty, but genuine concern. The great stallion stomped restlessly as Magnus lifted Lyra effortlessly onto its back. The king's cloak enveloped her completely, carrying his scent, wood smoke, leather, and something distinctly masculine that made her heart race despite her exhaustion. Magnus swung up behind her, one arm securing her against his chest, while the other took the reins. Lyra felt herself enveloped in unexpected warmth as the king's body heat radiated through her frozen form. "My hunting lodge lies 2 miles north," Magnus explained, his breath warm against her ear. "Hold fast." The horse lurched forward into the storm, powerful muscles navigating the treacherous terrain with surprising speed. Lyra found herself clinging to the arm that held her, her body pressed against the solid wall of the king's chest. Through layers of fabric and fur, she could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart, so different from her own frightened, fluttering pulse. As they rode through the blizzard, she noticed how Magnus seemed to read the forest even in near-zero visibility, avoiding hidden ditches and fallen trees, as if he could see through the snow itself. For the first time since the bandits' attack, Lyra felt a flicker of true hope. The king might be fearsome, his reputation bloodied by war and politics, but in this moment he was sanctuary embodied. The last thing she registered before exhaustion claimed her was Magnus tightening his grip as she slumped against him, his voice rumbling through his chest. "Stay with me, little one. The worst is behind you now." Magnus felt the exact moment Lyra's consciousness slipped away, her body becoming dead weight against him. Concern sharpened his focus as he urged his horse faster through the worsening storm. The young woman in his arms was dangerously cold, her survival hanging by the thinnest thread. Something protective stirred within him, an unfamiliar sensation for a man whose life had been defined by conquest rather than preservation. The hunting lodge appeared through the whiteout, a solid structure of stone and timber built to withstand the harshest Estonian winters. Magnus dismounted with Lyra cradled against his chest, her slight frame weighing almost nothing to a man of his strength. He kicked the door open and strode inside, laying her gently on the bearskin rug before the cold hearth. Years of wilderness survival had made Magnus efficient in crisis. Within minutes, a fire roared in the massive stone fireplace, casting dancing light across Lyra's pale features. He removed her sodden boots and outer garments, replacing them with dry furs. Her skin was alarmingly cold, fingers and toes showing the early blue-white signs of frostbite. "Lyra," Magnus called firmly, patting her cheek. "You must wake." Her eyelids fluttered briefly, but remained closed. The king cursed under his breath. He had seen enough winter deaths to recognize the danger. Hypothermia had her firmly in its grasp. Sleep now could mean death. Making a swift decision, Magnus shed his own outer garments down to his woolen undertunic. He gathered Lyra into his arms and settled onto the bearskin rug, positioning her against his chest with her back to the fire. Wrapping furs around them both, he used his body heat as the most effective weapon against the cold that sought to claim her. "Fight, little wolf," he murmured into her hair. "I did not save you from the pack to lose you to the frost." As he held her, Magnus found himself studying her face. Even pale and drawn with cold, she possessed a quiet beauty that spoke of inner strength. This was no pampered court lady, but a woman forged by hardship. The calluses on her hands told of work, healing work, if he recognized the distinctive marks left by processing herbs. He wondered what circumstances had placed such a woman on a merchant caravan in the dead of winter. Lyra stirred in his arms, a small sound of distress escaping her lips as sensation painfully returned to her extremities. Magnus carefully massaged her fingers and then her feet, encouraging blood flow, while watching for the dangerous darkening that would indicate tissue beyond saving. To his relief, her skin began to pink rather than blacken. "There you are," he said as her eyes finally opened, confusion giving way to recognition. "The mighty king," she whispered, her voice hoarse but gaining strength. "You truly exist." A rare smile tugged at the corner of Magnus's mouth. "As do you, against considerable odds." He reached for a pot hanging near the fire, pouring steaming broth into a wooden cup. Supporting her head, he helped her drink slowly. "Small sips. Your body must remember how to be warm." Lyra's eyes never left his face as she drank, studying him with an intensity that few would dare direct at the formidable ruler. "They say you have the heart of a wolf," she murmured, "that you show no mercy." Magnus's expression remained impassive, though something flickered in his eyes. "And yet, here you are, alive by my hand," he replied evenly. "Perhaps the tales are incomplete." As the long night deepened around the hunting lodge, the howling storm provided a strange cocoon of isolation that stripped away the usual barriers of station and circumstance. Lyra regained enough strength to sit upright beside Magnus, though she remained wrapped in furs. The king moved about the cabin with practiced ease, preparing a simple meal of dried meat, hard bread, and more of the warming broth. "You're skilled at survival," Lyra observed as he efficiently maintained their shelter against the raging elements. Magnus added wood to the fire, sparks dancing upward. "Necessity teaches the harshest but most effective lessons," he replied. "I was 12 when I first survived a blizzard alone." He didn't elaborate, but Lyra sensed the weight of history behind his words. "My father taught me that nature is neither cruel nor kind, merely indifferent. Our survival depends on respect for that indifference." Lyra nodded, warming her hands around the cup he had given her. "My mother said something similar about illness. It strikes without malice or preference." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the storm's distant rage. "Tomorrow, when the storm breaks, I will take you to Talon," Magnus said finally, his deep voice contemplative. "Was that your destination?" Lyra nodded, though a strange reluctance settled in her chest at the thought of their paths diverging so soon. "I am to serve as healer's apprentice at the castle infirmary." Magnus looked at her with new interest. The position under Master Einar. That was to be filled by a healer from the southern provinces. Lyra smiled faintly. "I am that healer, my lord. My reputation may have traveled further than my physical self." For the first time, Magnus laughed, a rich sound that transformed his severe features. "Indeed. Einar has spoken highly of the young woman who developed the fever treatment that saved half of Rosehaven village last winter. He studied her with new respect. I did not expect someone so—" "Young?" Lyra supplied. "Female." "Heart." Magnus shook his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "Resilient," he corrected. "You should have died twice tonight, yet here you sit, discussing healing practices as if we met at court, rather than in a blizzard." The fire illuminated his face, softening the hard angles of jaw and brow. In that moment, Lyra saw beyond the fearsome Alpha King to the man beneath, solitary, powerful, and perhaps as unused to genuine connection as she was. "Perhaps," she ventured softly, "we were meant to meet this way, with all pretense stripped away by survival's demands." Something shifted in Magnus's expression, a recognition, an acknowledgement of something neither had expected to find in this remote cabin while death prowled outside. The blizzard's fury diminished with the dawn, sunlight breaking through clouds to cast the snow-covered forest in blinding brilliance. Magnus and Lyra emerged from the hunting lodge into a transformed world. Icicles hung like crystal daggers from branches, and untouched snow spread before them like a blank canvas. Magnus's stallion, sheltered overnight in the adjoining stable, snorted clouds of steam into the frigid morning air. "The cold remains dangerous," Magnus said as he helped Lyra mount, "but the worst has passed." He swung up behind her with practiced ease, one arm securing her against him. The journey to Talon would take hours even under ideal conditions, and these were far from ideal. As they rode, Lyra found herself acutely aware of the man whose life had somehow become intertwined with hers through chance and survival. She had expected to feel awkward in the light of day, but instead found a comfortable silence between them, broken occasionally by Magnus pointing out landmarks or warning of hidden ditches beneath the snow. The city walls appeared on the horizon by midday, Talon's medieval spires reaching toward the winter sky. Magnus guided his horse toward a less traveled gate rather than the main entrance. "Fewer questions this way," he explained when Lyra looked at him curiously. The guards snapped to attention at the king's approach, bowing deeply as they recognized their sovereign despite his informal dress. Lyra suddenly felt the full weight of who he was, not just the man who had saved her, but the ruler of these lands, a person of power and consequence far beyond her station. As they passed through the streets, people stopped and bowed, whispers following in their wake. The king with an unknown woman, both bearing the marks of wilderness survival, made for irresistible speculation. Magnus seemed oblivious to the attention, focused only on their destination, the castle rising above the city center. When they reached the castle courtyard, Magnus dismounted first, then reached up to help Lyra down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, his expression unreadable. "Your new quarters will be in the healer's wing," Magnus said, nodding toward the eastern section of the castle. "Master Einar will be relieved you survived the storm." A servant approached, bowing low. "Your Majesty, the council awaits your return." Magnus nodded dismissal to the messenger before turning back to Lyra. The formal setting had created a sudden distance between them, king and subject rather than two survivors. Lyra curtsied deeply, though the movement felt strangely artificial after the raw honesty of their shared night. "My eternal gratitude, Your Majesty. You saved my life." Magnus's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Lyra Rose," he said, her name flowing from his lips like something precious. "In my experience, those who survive such extremes are forever changed by it. The person you were before the blizzard no longer exists." His penetrating blue eyes held hers. "I am curious to know who emerged from the storm." Before she could respond, he turned and strode toward the main keep, his powerful figure commanding immediate respect from all he passed. Lyra watched him go, a strange mixture of loss and anticipation filling her chest. Something had begun in that blizzard, something neither had anticipated, but both had recognized. As she was led toward her new quarters, Lyra glanced back once to see Magnus paused at the castle entrance, looking back at her with an expression that promised their story was far from complete. The Alpha King had found something unexpected in the winter forest, and she suspected he was not a man who easily let go of what he considered his to protect.